22. The unkindest cut of all. To prune or not to prune? Every time one of my jungle additions reaches the beanstalky stage, I am confronted with the same tortuous decision. To prune or not to prune? Well, not quite every time. Some plants are designed to just grow straight up. For instance, palm trees, either coconut or date or papaya, banana or pineapple. Pruning these, except to remove wilted leaves, would be tantamount to plant mutilation. A somewhat general rule of thumb to follow is that plants whose leaves all spread out from one crown, or a succulent or very watery stemmed tropical plant, will usually not be helped by pruning. Show me such a plant and I can wave the question aside with an air of confident finality. Real trees and vines are something else again. Here I lose my air of Papa knows best. I have a moot question on my hands. Certainly, when fruit trees are under cultivation, pruning serves a definite function. It keeps the trees more compact and the fruit within easier picking reach. In addition, shortening the main branches make them sturdier, so they can carry a heavier crop of fruit without breaking under their weight, such breaking, I suppose, being a form of natural pruning. But the after-dinner gardener isn't usually trying to cultivate a whole orchard on his windowsill. Here, pruning becomes a matter of choice, not necessity, except, of course, in the case where a plant outgrows or overgrows the room, a not infrequent occurrence. According to some, pruning produces a more attractive apartment-shaped plant, and it can't be disputed that in many cases, as with citrus trees or the avocado, it does tend to produce a stronger, more filled-out tree. Preferring the natural look myself, I would argue that it's more interesting to see what the plants do on their own. Will the avocado begin branching at 3 feet? Not too likely. At 6 feet, about average. At 9 feet, problems ahead. Or not even after it hits the ceiling, definitely time to cut back. The lemon tree pictured grew straight up for 3 feet, then swaying in the breeze one day, the tender shoot got seasick, I think. Whatever the case, it fell off. A case of natural pruning. Everything seems to be hormones these days. Plants are no exception. When a plant is cut back or pruned, what happens next is due to a hormone called auxin, more properly known as indole 3-acetic acid, abbreviated IAA. Since I find the biochemist's specialized language and the diagrams that go with it highly confusing, I'll keep calling it auxin. The presence of auxin was suspected for many years before it was actually found. Darwin, discussing the Earth's gravitational pull and its relation to plant root development, wrote that it is the tip alone which is acted on, and that this part transmits some influence to the adjoining parts, causing them to curve downward. Nobody knew quite what this influence might be, but it was surmised surmised to exist as a physical substance. In the early 1930s, Kogel and Hagenschmidt, and this was before the era of esoterically named rock groups, isolated a substance they called auxin A and later one they called auxin B, but nobody else managed to find them. Unperturbed, the group took on a third man, Exleben, and went on to discover what we know as auxin today. To differentiate it from the auxins they'd found before, just in case somebody should suddenly rediscover those, Kogel, Hagenschmidt, and Exleben called the new one heteroauxin, or the other auxin. It was found distributed throughout a living plant, but concentrated most in the growing tips, which would include both the above-ground shoots and the roots. It wanders around in a plant all the time. More scientifically, it is translocated. How is the big question botanists still can't answer without arguing about it. Some describe it in terms of electrical charges, others in metabolic changes. All very interesting but likely to be challenged by the next guy on the quiz show. The only fact they seem to agree on is that auxin is the growth hormone for plants. Nevertheless, even this bare fact is a help in understanding how pruning works, and the theory of apical dominance, which has the largest number of followers at the moment, provides at least a logical framework on which to build an explanation. 1. Just the right amount of auxin, no more, no less, is needed for a plant to grow. This is the optimum amount. Either more or less auxin than the optimum amount inhibits growth. There is a minimum, optimum, maximum concentration of auxin possible in every part of the plant. In other words, either there is just enough auxin in the right place for the proper growth, or there is too little, the minimum, or too much, the maximum, in both of which latter cases growth will be slowed down. 2. The apical bud, the bud highest up on a plant, normally hogs the most auxin. This bud, according to the current theory, controls the growth of the whole plant, hence the name apical dominance. 3. The lateral buds poking out sideways along the upright stem or trunk of the plant are most sensitive to auxin than the rest of the plant. A concentration of auxin just right for the main plant is too strong for the lateral buds and keeps them from growing. The plant grows taller and the buds remain dormant. 4. The plant keeps growing as long as the apical bud, by whichever of the means under such hot debate, keeps sending auxin down the length of the plant from its abundant supply. If the apical bud is cut off, taking with it the major hoard of auxin, the main plant is left with a minimum supply and it stops growing. But the lower concentration of auxin is just right for the lateral buds and they begin to grow. Liberated branches sprout enthusiastically along the sides of the plant. 5. Basically, however, the plant prefers a state of apical dominance. Soon the lateral bud closest to the top will straighten up and become a new apex. In a short while it will take over apical dominance and again any lateral growth will be inhibited. 6. If the new apical bud is cut off too, the cycle starts all over again. In short, if you cut off the top of the plant, it will usually react by sending out branches. If you don't, it will do most of its growing straight up until it's pruned accidentally or naturally, as was my seasick lemon tree, or until it begins to branch by a method so complicated and debatable I prefer to say it just felt like branching. For pruning most young after dinner plants, a pair of large, sharp household scissors is usually adequate. I understand I am not to use Susan's sewing shears even if they are the largest and sharpest in the house. In the case of older woody plants beginning to grow back, an adolescent mango or avocado, for instance, a pair of pruning shears may be needed. Whichever you use, make the cut as clean as possible, avoiding tearing or splitting the bark along with them. Cutting should be done at a slant and relatively close, but not right down to a bud or leaf. Don't be afraid to cut back the apical bud considerably and a branch entirely if necessary. Except when trimming off a whole branch, however, always leave a bud or leaf just behind or below the bottom edge of each cut. If all the new and potential growth were to be removed at once, you'd end up with a brown bean pole. Ideal for growing vines on, but no longer a contributing member in good green standing of your jungle.